Welcome to Policies and Properties. I am Josh Wilton. I am the co-owner of Queens Realty, Princeton Property Management Services, Princeton Home Connections, amongst others. And tonight is our first episode about policy and properties. And what we're going to do is take each week, each Wednesday at 7:30, we're going to take on how policy affects housing, how policy affects housing values. Maybe your home in specific. So at the end of this, if you want to know what your house is worth in an area we're talking about, please feel free to reach out. And again, if you have topics, things that you would like us to talk about, whether it's on the regular channel or on policies and properties, please feel free to let me know. So this is going to be a weekly conversation about local decisions in really Princeton, West Windsor, Montgomery, Hopewell, the local. We'll talk definitely some state things. Housing is such a big deal right now. Affordability is really at an all-time low. Supply is at an all-time low. Today, Trump said he's not going to allow corporations to buy houses anymore. The issue that really only accounts for 7% of all buyers. So they bought 7%, but home prices went up 50%. The issue, it's an issue, right? But it's not as big as an issue as the media would tell you. Mamdani's tenant coordinator, for lack of a better description, kind of got lambasted today for saying that housing is more or less white privilege and a way to protect it. So housing is so topical and policy is so topical. Today, tonight, and every Wednesday at 7:30, unless you guys suggest a different time, we're going to talk policy and properties. That's really the objective for today. So for today, we're just going to go to one of the big ones. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will get to them as quickly as possible. But today, we're going to go right to, if you've been living under a rock, you might have missed this one if you live in Princeton, and it's the seminary development. So we're going to talk about the history of the development, kind of how we got where we are, and we're going to talk potentially about what I think might happen in terms of housing value in that neighborhood at the end. And obviously, we'll welcome your questions in the chat. So basically, everything we're talking about tonight is from public records. It's from public news sources. Plan of Princeton, the Town Topics, New Jersey Superior Court, Insider New Jersey. And again, this channel and this episode is not to be for or against any particular development or change in policy or law. It's to talk about it and talk about what I think will happen and the effect on local housing in our community. So you can support it, you can be opposed or undecided. The goal tonight is only clarity and not opinions, just questions. So to understand why this issue exists, let's talk about the history of the seminary site. So this one goes back, obviously the Princeton Theological Seminary is in the western section of Princeton. And the word bucolic is used a lot by the people who would describe the neighborhood. It's one of the older neighborhoods within Princeton. It's where Einstein lived. It's definitely some beautiful older housing in that neighborhood. And the seminary has been there for quite a while. So the issue was that the seminary, as all housing does, the seminary housing became functionally obsolete. And they have an issue that their students and graduate students are kind of spread out between West Windsor, Princeton. They had, married couples living in dorms with shared bathrooms. It just wasn't maybe the ideal setup for them as an institution. So buildings on Tenet's Robert Whitley campus were becoming underused or obsolete for the seminary purposes. So that was the long and short of what happened. So the seminary wrote a $100,000 check to Princeton to start the redevelopment of that site, because they wanted to build a new dorm and they wanted to build better housing for their students and graduate students, and honestly married couples who were living there and not having to have them share a bathroom with other people in a dorm. So 2018, the seminary started exploring options for redevelopment on that site. And they wanted to move forward with new students in housing. And they got some feedback from the neighbors, and it was not good. The neighbors opposed it. And at the time, I believe it was 138 new residences were going to be built by the seminary. So again, for context, the seminary for a year and a half, 2018 to 2019, year and a half, hundreds of thousands of dollars to redevelop land that they owned. It's not a historic district. Got some hard pushback from the neighbors saying, no, 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 doesn't conform with the neighborhood or the town. And as time went on, then you went into the sort of the construction boom, the cost boom, the inflation boom of 2019, 2020, post-COVID, where everything got more expensive. So the seminary said, look, between the pushback from the neighbors and the cost, this just doesn't serve our interest anymore. And they decided to sell that parcel. So what was interesting, once the seminary stepped away from institutional housing, the land was no longer needed for the seminary and became eligible for non-institutional redevelopment under municipal planning law. So again, and I'm not faulting the neighbors, change is hard, right? And we're going to talk about sort of the schism I see in Princeton at any rate right now. The town did not make the decision to sell the lot in redevelopment. The seminary did. They wanted the money. Land is worth a lot of money, right? So in 2018, the Princeton did designate the seminary site as an area in need of redevelopment. So what does that mean? It wasn't blighted or neglected necessarily. It was a beautiful campus, but it's a planning tool, not a condemnation tool. So the town said, okay, look, you're going to sell it. It's a site in need of redevelopment. So the town could use a different legal framework, redevelopment rather than standard zoning, which is different. So a lot of people are like, well, how does this happen? The seminary wanted one thing. They got pushed back. Costs definitely doubled, right? It took a long time, longer than anybody would ever care to think to do anything in terms of development. They punted it. They sold it. So redevelopment from the town's perspective and the seminary's perspective allows more flexibility in use and layout because that particular parcel wasn't in a normal zone, right? So the designation of redevelopment didn't approve the project. It allowed the planning to begin. So now, fast forward. They sell the parcel, the seminary, to a private developer, Jamie Herring, who I know and I respect. He's an amazing developer, knows what he's doing. He's a Princetonian. Not that that matters. Like if you're a developer, you don't have to live here to develop property. So Jamie is a professional developer, and he owns a lot of land. He's developed a lot of parcels, and he knows what he's doing. So he bought the rights to the seminary development. So the site covers about 4.8 acres, right? And now the plan allows up to 238 residential units, right? Versus that 130-ish that the seminary originally wanted. And again, not condemning the neighbors for saying, well, that's a lot more than was here, the new dorm. Now they have double that coming up through a private developer on a site that's been hit for redevelopment. And this is probably where things went sideways for the neighbors. It's seemingly on both sides of town. So now you have 238 units going in. 20% of them, about 48 units, 48 apartments, because this is not fee simple housing, this is apartments, are required to be affordable housing. And that is required by the state of New Jersey. So why is that required by the state of New Jersey? Because the Mount Laurel case, which is the Mount Laurel housing doctrine in the state of New Jersey, said that towns in New Jersey used exclusionary zoning to prevent development and keep people out. They wanted to keep it the way it was. They wanted to keep their neighbors the way they were. So this case goes back to the 70s, and the state and the law states that towns have to have accommodation for mixed use development. So what did the towns do? They fought it, just like the neighbors fought the original seminary plan, and they fought and they fought and they fought. And this is 2025. This is going way back. And finally, to kind of unclog this bottleneck, the builders, right, started suing towns under something called the builder's remedy, meaning that they're allowed to build under the Mount Laurel doctrine, and the towns are trying to prevent them. And this is, by the way, this is a state level issue. Like there are still towns suing the state saying this is going to ruin our town, like literally ruin our town. And not just, this isn't just a Princeton issue. This is a New Jersey issue. So now, instead of 130 units, dorms, that we have 238 apartments. 48 of them are affordable housing. The rest are basically luxury apartments. And the affordable units are targeted for income qualified households, including workers such as teachers, nurses, and municipal employees. That's from New Jersey housing standards. The remaining units would be market rate, and they're going to run anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000. It's not cheap. The rentals are not cheap, and amazingly, they get rented out, right? So I don't really have any skin in the game. Like I'm not going to rent one. I'm not a developer. I don't live in the neighborhood. This is just factually how this all happened. So the 20% affordable housing. So let's talk about that for a minute, right? The 20% set aside for affordable housing, it's a compromise. It's a negotiated compromise by the town and towns in New Jersey to comply with the affordable housing. The towns don't really have a choice under the law. The courts have found time and time again that the towns have to comply with the Mount Laurel Doctrine. It's not an option. In Princeton, from my understanding, at least my research, and I had an episode with Mayor Frieda, they fought it for a while. Now that Princeton's trying to get ahead of it. So Princeton and every town in New Jersey has a choice, right? And the choice is, do we come out of pocket and build 100% affordable housing, which is 100% financed by the town, right? Or do we compromise and say, look, we're going to, my dad texted me. Hang on, let's see what hopefully my dad logged in. He can't log in, so my dad will have to watch it later. Sorry, I love my dad. So the 20% is a negotiated compromise, right? So the 100%, if the town had to build 100% affordable housing, the town pays for that 100%. If they do the seminary and Jamie Herring builds it, Jamie Herring pays for it, right? If 20% goes to the affordable housing, it counts against the town's affordable housing quota, and there is a quota. So those 48 units are going to go against the town's quota. But then what happens is the developer, in this case, Jamie, right, gets a tax break. And we're going to talk about that. So this is just sort of like the walkthrough of how we got to orange and blue signs all through Princeton. We're going to talk about that later. So the plan establishes design, circulation, open space, stormwater management. It went through the planning board. I mean, it's in court, like this has been going on since 2019. So the neighbors, obviously, they were opposed to the dorm. Fine, I get it. It's their neighborhood. Now they're opposed to double the amount, right? And it's 238 versus 138. And you drive down 206 or Mercer Road, I forget. One of the neighbors has a sign up: 261 cars coming soon, with an arrow pointing towards the seminary development. Like, it's a real issue. It's a live issue. It's a hot button issue because change is hard, and it is coming whether we want it to or not. So it's a question of context, and that's really why we're here on this episode. And by the way, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. A colleague of mine is actually monitoring it, and we'll make sure we answer any questions for you along the way or comments. And again, the only thing I would say is, if you're a Princeton resident, right, be nice to your neighbors. Orange signs, blue signs, no need to be negative here. So let's talk about who supports it and who opposes it. And I think this is where it gets a little icky. So the supporters of the site say that the people who oppose it are against affordable housing. The people that oppose the site say, no. We're not against affordable housing. We're against supporting luxury development at the expense of affordable housing, which is sort of interesting. So is it better to have 100% affordable housing project literally right there, or is it better to have a mixed use project right there? Well, right now, unless something dramatically happens in court, it's going to be a mixed use project. So, what's happened is it's become a political hot button or a cultural or social hot button. So on the western side of town, and I have friends there, they've called me about it. They said, what do you think? And that was really the beginning of this process of having this episode. And as I get better with technology, I'm gonna have guests be able to appear live and ask questions live on this broadcast. Um, so what's icky about it is I would say the name calling. If you're against it, you're against affordable housing. If you're for it, you're for subsidizing developers. And there's orange signs. According to the Defend Historic Princeton website, 200 plus signs defend historic Princeton throughout Princeton. And then a sort of a counter group sprung up to that, Princeton for All, with the number 4, princetonforall.org. And all of a sudden you have blue signs. So it's sort of like the orange signs are on the other side of town, which will be directly affected by this development. The blue signs are more on this side of town, and I'm sitting on the corner of Nassau Street and Harrison Street, saying, no, we should be more inclusionary. We should have more development, right? So, supporters to town officials, definitely the town council, planning professionals, affordable housing advocates were definitely in favor of it, saying, look, this is a good project. It hits a lot of buttons. The town doesn't have to come out of pocket. We get more or less 50 affordable housing units. The opponents, are residents and historic preservation advocates. And it's really incredible. I have to say, like, doing the research for this episode, I was not directly involved in it. I'm not a stakeholder in it. So you'd read the town topics, you'd read Plan to Princeton or Tap into Princeton, and you kind of and you kind of move on. It's really got interesting when the signs started popping up. So, historic preservation advocates, Ken Burns, who's a documentary filmmaker who just made another film, signed a letter opposing this. And I don't know if Ken Burns would know this, like if you hit him in the head with it, but he signed a letter opposing it, as did other preservationists. So the opponents of it say the scale and the height of the buildings are an issue, meaning that neighborhood is a low-rise neighborhood, like it's smaller, 2-level housing for the most part. Obviously, the seminary has some different housing, but in that particular part of the neighborhood, this will be above the zoning, the current zoning. Traffic congestion. If you drive down there, you see the thing like 261 cars coming soon to you. Anytime you displace dirt with concrete, stormwater and flooding can be an issue, as we all know. And then, another overriding concern is the town pushing past historic area with, using redevelopment to push past a historic area. I think according to the law, at least in my understanding, the seminary parcel is not subject to historic review. I know on Edge Hill and a couple of the other neighborhoods there are. And I've talked to neighbors on Edge Hill. Some of them are obviously vehemently opposed to it. Others don't care. Others think it's fine. They're just kind of like, just get on with it already, And some of them, another neighbor on Edge Hill who I spoke to, and these will all remain anonymous, was a little taken aback by, the level of the vitriolic level of anti-development in the neighborhood. I'll say that, but but people are like, look, this is my backyard. So for the people who say, yeah, I'm for it, imagine if, an apartment building was being built in your backyard. So I can see both sides of the argument. I get it. And again, we'll get to how this will affect what we think will affect housing prices in the neighborhood. So again, it's when you look at it, and by the way, I have to say the Defend Historic Princeton website is like first class. By the time I was done reading it, it's so well done. You're like, oh, you should be against this site, because it's really well done. The Princeton, the welcoming princetonforall website.org, it needs a little bit of work. So just so those guys know. So the court fight. So the neighbors took the town and the seminary to court. The residents filed a lawsuit seeking to block the ordinance. If you look at the New Jersey Superior Court filings, they argue that the designation and the plan were inappropriate for the site and violated planning principles, right? That's a very basic summation of it. If you go to the Defend Historic Princeton site, obviously there's a lot more detail on their why. So October 2025, the state New Jersey Superior Court upheld Princeton's redevelopment ordinance. So they took it to the Superior Court. The court found the town followed all the proper procedures and acted within the scope of redevelopment law. And that is right from the New Jersey Superior Court itself. So the court did not rule whether this is good or bad for Princeton. and I understand there's two big, very vocal camps on this. It decided whether the redevelopment of the seminary parcel followed the law. And that's where people, I think, I don't want to say get confused, because I would never, assume what people are thinking. But I think what happens is, people, think the courts are in cahoots with the town. And they're not. They're like, it was done legally. That's it, right? So, regardless of whether you're for it or against it, things are going to change. And it's a question of, what's going to change for the houses in the neighborhood. So let's talk about the state affordable housing law context, right? So all the towns were required to adopt housing plans by December 31st, 2025. I did interview Mayor Frida about this. One of the topics we covered was affordable housing. I have to say, Princeton's so far out ahead of it. There's other towns just fighting it. Millburn is probably, in my opinion, a case study of what not to do. They keep fighting the town, they keep fighting the state, and they keep losing. And then the builders sue Millburn under the builders remedy law. And they had a pretty good plan, and then the town, like at the last second, the town council like squashed it and said, no, we're not going to develop it. And then the builders sued them and won in court, and now they're just building, the builders building whatever they want. The town really isn't getting the input. So it's a tough line to dance as a municipal leader, town council, planning board, and or a mayor. These people are all pretty much underpaid and overworked. So towns have to publicly post housing plans. They want fewer prolonged lawsuits, and they want clearer timelines. So towns now have deadlines extending into 2026, including March, to implement ordinance tied to these plans. So this is not an optional exercise. So the towns that are suing to prevent this from happening, if they get ruled against it, if you were a betting person, you'd probably bet that they're going to get ruled against based on past decisions in the court. They're just going to be that much more behind the eight ball. So Princeton is I would say, I'm not an expert, but I would say as a resident and someone who appreciates the pressure the municipalities are under, by having interviewed Mayor Frida and talked to other people about it, they're pretty far out ahead of it. Like, they've done a pretty good job trying to get ahead of these affordable housing timelines. So other towns are really, under the gun to get this done. So the redevelopment plan sets the rules. It doesn't guarantee construction, right? So the town has been for this. So, the legal framework is set, and the developer has been said, are you wavering on this? And I think his answer was, I don't directly quote me here, was absolutely not, meaning he's going forward with this particular development. So, when you look, let me just go to the affordable. So the Daily Princetonian had a great article: to defend or expand. That's the question for one controversial Princeton development. So, and again, they've referenced it's 261 more cars, right, coming down 206 and Mercer Road. And again, there's interesting components when you dig into it. The access points of the community are interesting. Is it going to jam up congestion? Are the Edge Hill homeowners getting a raw deal? So there's a lot that goes into this, right? So, the court decision and the pilot agreement. So let's talk about the pilot agreement. So everyone, this is a big point of contention. So if you go on the Defend Historic Princeton website, I think they make good points, but the money's got to come from somewhere to pay for this, right? And this is where the municipalities, horrible expression, have a gun to their head. So pilot agreement, a pilot, P-I-L-O-T, is payment in lieu of taxes, right? And it's an agreement that a town makes with the developer. Here's what this means. The town says, look, if we were to come out of pocket to build, and I'm making this up, 75 affordable housing units or 50 affordable housing units, it's millions and millions of dollars that they can only go one place for, and that's the property owners in Princeton. So your taxes would go up. So the compromise that these towns have come up with is the pilot program. So a developer, in this case Jamie Herring, builds the parcel, 20% affordable housing, 80% market rate, and he doesn't pay taxes the way other people do, meaning I own homes in Princeton, and I do, and my partners own a home. We're brokers and investors, right? So we pay residential taxes. We don't get a break. We own a property, we pay tax. One of my clients owns a bunch of commercial buildings on Nassau Street. He pays the full boat, and he pays a lot of taxes, and the taxes aren't going down, right? So if you ever wonder why rents are going up, it's because towns use real estate as a piggy bank, right? So the pilot program is payment in lieu of taxes. So a developer builds the parcel and says, look, it's not financially viable to build this and pay all these property taxes every year. So what the town says, okay, we don't have to pay the taxes, but what you have to do is give us a payment, right? Payments, plural, that more or less they get to decide what to use. And so what happens is, I think in this particular case, it's $631,000 in first year revenue under pilot, versus the long-term tax implications. So, and then it's a question of where does that money go? Because normally, right, 50% of your taxes goes to the schools. In this particular case, it doesn't necessarily go to the schools. So then it gets very murky, right? But at the end of the day, the money, the Mount Laurel statutes in the state of New Jersey are the law, and affordable housing has to be built, unless, so I would say, has, just based on the way these judges have ruled on it, the courts have ruled on it, and this is like time and time again, this is not going away. So if I'm a municipality and I have to build affordable housing, do I want to increase taxes, or I say, look, take this development, Mr. and Mrs. Developer, build it, don't pay us all the taxes you normally would pay us, give us a pilot payment or 2 or 3 or 4, right? And then you can have your development, and we don't have to come out of pocket to build 50 affordable housing units. So it's sort of like a financial compromise. It gives the town predictable revenue while allowing the project to pencil out for the developer in terms of profit. So when you look at it, it's just everything's sort of like a big, squishy, messy compromise that nobody seems to be happy with. The neighbors definitely are not happy with it. They're suing. And it's a question, if there's a neighbor watching this in the Institute area who's in Defend Historic Princeton, I'd love to have you on the show. I'd love to talk to you. Should you have taken the dorm deals? I don't know. Like, it was 138 versus 200, 130 versus 238. So if you have questions, obviously feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to do some Q&A before we wrap it up. So again, the compromise is ugly, right? It's ugly. So it's tough. Now, the Defend Historic Princeton website, which I'm looking at, does have density figures for this. So if you're familiar with Princeton, the Alice up at the shopping center, this is about 10%, I think, more dense than the Alice. It's the densest development, according to their website, amongst the densest developments in the state, meaning it's got the most units per mile in the state. And again, it's a part of town that was sort of like leafy suburban, and now it's going to have an apartment building in it. So I'll say this: I do remember when the Princeton Hospital was going to be torn down, right? And Avalon was coming into town, and everyone's like, literally, somebody came in my office, a neighbor, and said, "That's going to ruin the town." Literally, it's going to ruin the town. Not having the hospital on Witherspoon Street, it's going to ruin the town. Those apartments are going to ruin the town. And, look, I had kids born in that hospital. I was thinking, I don't know, that hospital's a little bit long in the tooth. Like, it was all over the place. And I thought the Avalon plans looked pretty nice or whatever. And so I was kind of, neutral about it. Like, I didn't really have an opinion about it one way or the other. So now, I don't know. I think people drive by it and say, oh, there's the Avalon on Witherspoon Street. They don't think about it. And the only thing I can tell you from a real estate perspective is the Avalons, right? Because they have 1, 2, 3, I think, in Princeton now. And there's the Alice. They're full of people that want to buy your house. So let's talk about the long-term implications, I think, for that neighborhood. And I was a little reluctant to kind of stake a position as to what is going to happen with housing prices in those neighborhoods. But as somebody reminded me the other day, he said, "You are an expert in Princeton real estate." So I said, you know what, I'll take my shot. I don't see it affecting housing prices negatively. I think that neighborhood will appreciate just like any other neighborhood. I think that housing prices will go up just as they would if it were not there. I do think that it will give a place for people that want to stay in the neighborhood, a place to go that don't want to maintain their house anymore, especially if it's historic, right? Because they give you a pretty rough time about maintaining it. So I think it'll be an outreach for people that want to stay but don't want to own in that neighborhood. I think it's going to be filled with people who want to buy in that neighborhood. That's ultimately what I think is going to happen. So will Princeton be more dense? Yeah. Will there be more traffic? Yeah. Has that been a constant since I moved here over 20 years ago? Yeah. But my long-term outlook for housing in the neighborhood in terms of pricing, it's going to appreciate just like any other neighborhood in Princeton. Interestingly, the elementary schools play more of an impact than apartment developments on home prices in Princeton, right? Little Brook's on fire because it's the number one rated elementary school in Princeton. So if anybody's any questions, I would encourage you to put them in the chat. So there's some comments, but no questions. That's fine. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. And again, to wrap this up, if there's no questions, we're going to do this every week. If you have topics you'd like to see us discuss, we're going to do West Windsor, we're going to do Montgomery, we're going to do Hopewell, we're going to do Princeton, obviously, we're going to do Plainsboro. There's so much going on. I was with a client tonight in the same conference room talking about a new construction development happening in South Brunswick. I think it's a great development. It was sort of like a underutilized lot for a long time. They're going to put 3,000 square foot townhouses on this lot in South Brunswick. So the question is this: how do you think it affects the public schools? Aren't they overloaded already? Oh, that is a really good question. So will the density in the schools go up? Probably. Probably, yeah. So do I think they're overloaded? Not necessarily. I think there's things the schools can do, right? From the high school perspective, if enough kids start coming up through the elementary and the middle school system, they can sever the Cranberry Agreement. I know people in Cranberry don't want to hear that, but it's an option. And I don't say that lightly. My son's best friends were all from Cranberry. I'm not sure Princeton would have a football team, which was 8-1 this year, 7-1 this year, and didn't go to the playoffs, without the Cranberry kids. So, there's levers that the town has. Will they do that? I don't know. Is more school construction likely? Probably. But again, you look at the Valley Road building, the school is sitting on some of the most valuable real estate in Princeton, and it's a derelict building that's underutilized, and it probably should be used for housing. And the school administrator should go to the municipal offices. So another question: I'm interested to know what you think about development, specifically in the context of new rental builds in Princeton. Do you think luxury rentals will actually fill? I would say this. I thought if you looked at the averages of where I thought the rental prices would go in Princeton, I thought they would have come down with the Avalons, plural, right, Witherspoon Street, 2 at the shopping center. They really didn't. The average rental price in Princeton, which does not include those communities, that's from the MLS data, actually went up. So do I think they'll fill? Yeah, I think they will. I think people want to live here. I think people want to walk to town. I think people, especially as they get older, they don't want to deal with a big house or a house anymore. They just want to, they want to live here for however long, and they don't want to, clean the leaves out of the gutters, and they want a nice place to live. So do I think they'll fill? Yeah, I do. I think they will fill. I don't want to say no problem, but I think they'll hit their occupancy rates to make money. That's for sure. So yeah, I thought Princeton housing prices would have come down, but rental prices would have come down with all the development, but it just hasn't quite happened. I'd say the market softened, meaning things aren't renting as quickly or as far. But when you look at the COVID bump, other than that, prices have been pretty consistently going up. So I think they'll fall. Any other questions before we wrap? Okay. Well, again, this is Policy and Properties. I am Josh Wilton. If you have not subscribed to the Bolton Report, please do so. And we'll be back here each week talking about how the town and state decisions of policy affect your housing. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.